You know, uncertainty, it's a word that can make your palms sweat, or it can make your heart absolutely race with excitement, right? It can spell danger, or it can mean a huge opportunity. But why is that? Why can the exact same thing, the unknown, be so terrifying one moment and then the most thrilling thing in the world the next? Well, we're going to dive right into that because the answer, it turns out, has some pretty massive implications for how you make some of the biggest decisions in your life. So, let's get into the fear of unknowns. The thing is, we have this really contradictory relationship with what we don't know. I mean, on one hand, evolution has pretty much hardwired us to be cautious, right? To be wary. But then you think about it, and every single great leap forward, whether it's a personal career move or some huge societal innovation, required someone, somewhere, to just embrace that uncertainty. Okay, just to make this super clear, let's look at two scenarios. First, picture an early human wandering around, and they stumble upon a patch of berries they've never seen before. This is a life or death gamble. Seriously. Eat the wrong one, and that's it. Game over. In that case, fear of the unknown is literally a survival mechanism. Okay, now, let's fast forward to 1975. There's this brilliant Stanford student, Rick Wieland. He gets a call from a couple of his high school buddies. You might have heard of them, Bill Gates and Paul Allen. They ask him to drop out of school and join their tiny brand new company. Now, what's the logical move? Of course, it's to stay in school. But Wieland, he took that leap of faith. He became a lead programmer at Microsoft and eventually a huge philanthropist. See, it's the same exact ingredient, total uncertainty, but the outcomes couldn't be more different. So that really brings us to the core question we're trying to answer here. What is it that determines whether you see a field of poisonous berries or the next Microsoft? What's the thing that tilts the scale for us between pure fear and pure excitement? Well, it turns out the answer is actually hidden in our past. All right, so let's talk about how your past shapes your future. To really get a handle on why we react to uncertainty the way we do, we have to look inward. And some fascinating new psychological research is suggesting that our feelings about the future, they aren't really about the future at all. Nope, they're basically just a reflection of everything that's already happened to us. And this quote from a recent paper just nails it. It proposes a powerful idea. Our fear isn't actually of the unknown itself. It's the fear of the bad stuff we've been conditioned to expect will come from it. It's like, it's not the dark room that scares you. It's the monster you're absolutely convinced is hiding under the bed. So the way this works is actually a pretty clear three-step process. First, you've got your past experiences, everything from your childhood up until what happened last week. All of that stuff shapes your worldview. Then, step two, this collection of experiences, it creates a general expectation about how the world works. You basically become either an optimist or a pessimist. And then finally, that disposition, that gut feeling, is what directly fuels how you react when you face something new. And look, this isn't just some nice theory, okay? The evidence really backs this up. Study after study shows that adults who had tough childhoods, what they call adverse childhood experiences, they tend to have a much, much harder time dealing with uncertainty. And on the flip side, people who had more positive experiences early on, they're way more likely to see the unknown as a good thing, as an opportunity. It's like our personal history becomes the lens we use to see every single future possibility. Okay, so when the future gets fuzzy, what does that actually mean? We've established that our past can make us optimistic or pessimistic, but how does all that psychological baggage actually, mess with our real world decisions, especially with something like money? Well, it turns out it creates this kind of mental static. Yeah, there's a name for this. Economists Benjamin Enke and Thomas Graeber call it cognitive uncertainty. And you can think of it exactly like that, mental static or kind of fuzziness. So when you're trying to make a really complex decision, especially one about the future, this internal noise just makes it incredibly hard to think straight. And here's a great way to think about it. It's just like a staticky radio signal. The further away the station is, that's the future, right? The harder it is to hear the music clearly. So planning for what you're going to have for dinner tonight, that's a close station, clear signal. Planning for retirement in 30 years, that's a distant station, and there's a lot of static getting in the way. So what's the big deal with all this static? Well, the consequence is something researchers call a compression effect. All of that noise literally blurs the lines between different points in the future. All of a sudden, getting $105 in 3 years feels basically the same as getting it in 5 years. Even though if you think about it rationally, they're not the same at all. The entire future just kind of compresses into this one big fuzzy blob called later. Okay, but how on earth do you measure something so abstract? I mean, internal mental fuzziness. Well, it turns out you do it with a really cleverly designed experiment that involves something every single one of us can understand: Uber Eats. So the setup was super simple. People were asked to choose between getting a smaller Uber Eats voucher sooner or a larger one later. This is a pretty classic test of patience, or what economists would call an intertemporal choice. But here is the genius part. After they made their choice, they were asked one simple question. How certain are you? And this wasn't about whether they were certain the voucher would show up. No, no. It was about how confident they were in their own choice. This question was a direct way to measure that internal static, that cognitive noise. And the design of this whole thing was so clever. The researchers were so careful to isolate exactly what they were looking for. They got rid of any real-world uncertainty. The vouchers showed up in the app instantly, so there was no payment risk. There were no transaction costs. They even sent automated reminders so people wouldn't forget. The only uncertainty left in the whole equation was the one going on inside the participant's head. And the results? Whoa, they were crystal clear. You can see it right here. The more cognitive uncertainty a person reported, so the fuzzier they felt about their own choice, the more impatient they were. Simple as that. They were way more likely to just grab the smaller, immediate reward. That internal static just makes waiting for a better future feel too hard. Okay, so this is where it all comes together. We've got these two big ideas. On one side, we have the psychological theory about how our past shapes our expectations. And on the other, we've got hard economic evidence showing how that internal fuzziness makes us impatient. So what's the price of all this uncertainty? Well, here's the connection. That psychological baggage, the pessimism and the negative expectations that come from our past experiences, that's the source of the cognitive noise. A life that's taught you to always expect the worst makes it physically harder to think clearly and confidently about the future. And that brings us to the bottom line, the really crucial takeaway here. This mental noise, this cognitive uncertainty, it has a real, tangible cost. It actually makes us devalue our own future. It pushes us towards taking the easy win now over planning for the long term. And that affects everything, from how we save for retirement to whether we invest in our own education. The price we pay for our past uncertainty is a poor future. So this really leaves us with a pretty powerful thought, doesn't it? If we know that our past can cloud our judgment, how certain are you about your next big decision? Knowing that the ghosts of your past experiences might be creating static in your head, whispering in your ear every time you face the unknown, how can you ever be sure you're seeing the future clearly? It's definitely something to think about.